So the book of Amos is a wonderful place to start for us because it contains many features that are going to be typical of all of the classical prophets, all of the literary prophets by and large. And also this book introduces certain major themes. These will become standard themes of prophecy with some variation here and there. So by setting them out in the book of Amos, then we can really go forward and just look at the variations on some of those themes that are sounded by some of the other prophets. So first some literary features, and then we'll talk about the themes of the book. In terms of literary features, you see in the book what we would call editorial notes. That is to say, you have notes in the book of Amos which are in the third person. These will very often occur at the beginning of a book. They sort of introduce or set the stage. So we have in Amos, the words of Amos, a sheep breeder from Tekoa, who prophesied concerning Israel in the reigns of Kings Uzziah of Judah and Jeroboam the son of Joash of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. So almost all of the prophetic books are going to contain an introduction of this type. Some third-person phrase which will identify the place and the prophet and his time. There's another kind of writing in some of these works as well, which is in the first person. It's not always in the third person, but you sometimes have first-person passages in which the prophet himself will speak about and describe something about himself, right? It's stepping aside from the oracular moment and speaking in some way about some experience that he's had. So we have these first-person and these third-person passages that give us information about the prophet. The third-person passages, we surmise, may have been written by the prophet, but they were probably written by disciples or others who were responsible for collecting the prophet's oracles, inditing the prophet's oracles. Amos 7 is an example of this. In Amos 7, we find an example of this kind of writing again, where you have a description of Amos in debate with a priest Amaziah, at the shrine of Bethel. Okay, so you have the oracular statements, but you also have these other identifying passages as well, and descriptive passages. This brings us then to a second point, which is that the prophetic books are a compilation of a variety of materials. All right, they consist of varied materials that have been collected, they've been revised, they've been supplemented. The prophet's oracles, which were delivered in various situations over a period of time, were apparently saved and then compiled. Again, perhaps by the prophet himself, perhaps by his disciples. We know that prophetic oracles were written down and transmitted in other ancient Near Eastern societies. We know this about Assyria, for example. These were literary compositions, and the literary nature of these compositions will account sometimes for their ordering. Sometimes it appears that there is not chronological ordering. This is one of the things that can make it so hard to read some of the prophetic writings, because the oracles are not necessarily in chronological order. They are literary works, and sometimes the prophet or the disciple or the editor would combine principles or combine oracles or juxtapose oracles according to principles other than chronology, literary principles. So for example, you very often find the principle of a catchword, a prophecy or oracle that might end with a particular word in its last line or last verse, and so next to it will be a second prophecy or oracle which echoes that word in its opening line, and so the two have been brought together for literary reasons. So Amos 3 verse 2 reads, "You alone have I known of all the families of the earth." And that's the concluding line of that particular oracle, and that verb, to know, is probably the catchword for the oracle that follows, because the next one opens, "Do two people walk together unless they know each other?" So that may have suggested the juxtaposition of those two.